Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, Identity and Influence. My name is Mo, and as always, I'm sitting here with the identity specialist himself, Dr. Lem Usita.
Yes, sir. Good seeing you, man. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I'd love to dive right into this topic. What a great article, as always, but this one is going to impact you as a leader out there. Doesn't matter what sector you're in. Because whether you're leading in business, education, nonprofits, the military, or at home with your own family, we're talking about leadership of the future. So,
yeah,
Dr. Lim, why don't you take us through why you were inspired to write this and give us a little taste before I get into my questions?
Yeah. Leadership of the future has to do with the current state of how we relate, how we interact, like how the world has changed in the last 20 years. And so because of the changes, because of the paradigm shifts in the way that we interact, with the way that media gets out there, with the number of friends and followers that we can have these days, it's no longer like, a handful. You can interact with thousands, literally thousands of people with a post or with video, and it's a different world. The world has changed. The world will continue to change. And part of the idea of the article is, if you're going to lead, you can't keep doing the same stuff over and over and over again, because, you're not going to be relevant if you keep doing the same stuff.
Leadership in the future is going to be different than it is today. What specific shifts do you see happening in leadership as we move into the future, and why should current leaders start paying attention now?
Man, that's a great... let me just expound on like some of the shifts that have happened. I think the shifts, though, isn't so much in leadership as much as it is the way that the world works these days, man. There's a lot of things that have happened in the last 20 years. The thing that stands out the most to me is the democratization of the web. I've been hearing that for over a decade now. And that has to do with the idea that the internet and the digital technologies can empower individuals and foster more inclusive and participatory societies by increasing access to information and enabling broader participation in online spaces and decision-making processes. And what that means is, it's a lot easier to make stuff. It's a lot easier to produce things. There was a time where you needed the equipment to record a song. You needed the equipment to write a book. You needed permission to write an article for a magazine or produce music or make a movie. Like, you used to need equipment and permission to do stuff. And now everything can be done on your phone, right? You can make movies, you can write articles, you can make music, you can take pictures. Everybody's a model. Everybody's a photographer. You know what I'm saying? Like, man, like, if we had this when we were kids, like, we would have done the same thing. You know what I mean? But like, now you can interact with literally 100,000 people. Like, I only have a couple of thousand like following me, but like, people can have hundreds of thousands, even millions of followers. Like, that's a lot of people to interact with. An individual can. In years past, it was a brand or a company that had that kind of reach, and now individuals have that kind of reach. You don't need permission. You don't need a degree. Anyone can do whatever. And here's the deal. You don't have to be older necessarily to lead, right? If you have a following and you're 18 or you're 14 or whatever, like, you're leading, because there's, hundreds of thousands of people following you. And it's also like, it's really interesting. It's also possible to disrupt an entire industry these days. And sometimes accidentally, like, not on purpose. The attention span of people has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter, and like, you got to be quicker. And so leadership has to account for some of these paradigm shifts in the way that we relate to each other, in the way that we communicate to each other. Man, there's been a bunch of changes, and leadership has to adjust accordingly.
You highlight in this article the timeless leadership principles: integrity, customer satisfaction, competitive advantage, and communicating a vision. I really want to break down those one by one. So Starting with integrity, Why do you believe integrity remains foundational, even as leadership strategies evolve over time?
So leadership strategies have changed, and what I'm saying is the world has changed. The paradigm shifts are happening, but human developmental psychology hasn't changed, right? The growth and development of an individual stays the same. And so like all of this stuff around us can change, but the way that a person grows and develops is the same. So no matter what it looks like, no matter what the identity, I mean, the foundational like paradigm shifts are in culture or the world or how we communicate, there's still a need for character and integrity. It's even more important because the internet and the democratization of the web amplifies what's already there. So if you're a troll, that's what's in your heart. That's what's in you. And we can see that these days. If you have integrity, we'll be more willing to trust you to lead us. There are guys like Gary Vaynerchuk that have written about the trust economy. And you know, like it's still a foundational need because at the end of the day, people are people. And that's why Lencioni says like the foundational layer of a team and leading has to do with trust. Gary Vaynerchuk says it's about the trust economy. And if you have integrity, you're somebody that we can trust. You're somebody that can lead. And so like, even though the paradigm shifts and the culture has changed, there are some human developmental ways of relating to people that just haven't changed.
Can you share an example of how integrity or somebody who doesn't or didn't have integrity makes or breaks leadership?
There are so many examples. The first one that comes to mind is Enron and how they just cheated people, right? Theranos is another example that comes to mind. Like if you've seen that the documentary, there's been a bunch of them on Elizabeth Holmes. She had this blood testing kind of thing that you could just get at like Rite Aid or whatever. And then it was supposed to like diagnose all kinds of crazy things. And they were just lying. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, they were just cheating people. And like a lot of people were dying because they thought, you know, like this little, you know, however much it costs, like took the place of, you know, a medically trained doctor. And you just can't shortcut those kinds of things. The whole Me Too movement was kind of a big deal in years past. And that all had to do with, you know, a producer in Hollywood being inappropriate with people, which then showed up in all these other areas. I mean, all of that made the news, and all of that has to do with integrity. It has to do with the character of the person. And if you lack integrity, you're going to make the news. If you lack integrity, you're not going to be someone that people are going to want to follow. You can't lead without it.
So customer satisfaction might sound like a business metric, but you actually tie it directly to leadership, which I love.
Yeah.
How can leaders in non-business settings like community organizations, ministries, how can these people apply the principle of customer satisfaction effectively?
Yeah, when I think of that question, I think, man, in most non-business settings, the exchange isn't money, right? Like in business, it's like I give you money and then you give me like a thing or service. In that non-business setting, like a community organization or ministry, that the exchange isn't money. The exchange is time. The exchange is attention. It's about service or salvation or something other. And in order to make those you know, in order to make them customers, you really need that people connection. You really need that relational capital with that person in order to make the sale, if you will, right? So that customer service or that customer delight, which I think is better than customer service, it creates loyalty. And once again, loyalty is the thing that helps you to develop trust. And when they trust you, they're willing to give you their time, their service, their attention, their whatever in exchange for, you know, service, salvation, other things.
Yeah, what comes to mind is when I lived in California, I had one guy who worked on all my cars. He was more expensive, but I trusted him and we had the relationship and I was willing to pay more.
Right.
Basically for the relationship. I knew he wasn't going to cheat me.
Trust.
I knew that
integrity. Yeah.
He was good at what he did. He still is. And he said, look, it's going to cost a little bit more, but you know that I stand by my work. And I've had to go back and I'd say, hey, this got messed up or whatever. And then I remember even a couple times he'd say, yeah, I saw this and I just took care of it. didn't
So
charge me
awesome.
for it or
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
And it was trust. It was a relationship. Sometimes he would tell
Loyalty.
me,
It breeds loyalty. Yeah.
absolutely. And so I don't mind paying more if I'm getting the relationship out of that.
Hmm.
So I really love that. So talking about competitive advantages, then
Yeah.
those are a lot of times associated with market positioning, but you argue that it's really inseparable from leadership. So what does competitive advantage look like in leadership beyond just the money aspect, beyond profits and markets?
Well, I think if we can work in the money aspect to that, as the world is changing, as business is changing, as we're disrupting industries, I think it looks like innovating and adapting to the paradigm shifts in culture and communication and the way that we're relating to people and the way that we're connecting with people in every area of life. It's all changing. If you keep doing the same thing in leadership over and over and over again, and you're not innovating, then you're not leading. And if you're not innovating, you're just maintaining. And like we've talked about before, if you're maintaining, that's management. You're just trying to manage a thing. And that's not leading. This is a leadership podcast. And we want to talk about leadership. And leadership has to do
Yeah.
with innovating and adapting in light of what the needs are with your customers.
So then how can leaders cultivate this within their teams and organizations?
All right. Man, honestly, I think in order to cultivate it within your team or organization, you're going to have to hire younger. You're going to have to develop them. Because here's the deal, the older folks are going to be like, let's just deal with what worked in the past. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
It worked. Why wouldn't it work again? So that's dangerous. I've seen it in organizations. I saw it in an organization that I ran. Like I talked about change. Let's make change. Let's adapt. Let's pivot. Let's do some other things. And they're like, nah, we got to go back to what worked, 20, 30 years ago because it worked. And that's all they're doing. The guys that can do it, the guys that understand the paradigm shifts are younger. And so if you're not hiring younger, like, don't be afraid to develop them. Like, you could still be better. You know what I mean? You could still help them be better. But I think one of the ways that you could do that is hire younger because they see the world way differently than we do.
Yeah, they really do. Let's talk about communicating a vision.
Yeah.
And that is obviously a classic leadership trait. If you can't give the vision, people are not going to follow you.
Yeah.
And so we live in a world of white noise. How can leaders communicate a compelling vision that inspires people?
You talk about a noisy world and, the noise out there. But these days, you can do that with a loud voice, like it's possible still to get out there through the noise and not yell, but just have enough of a following. And that's the deal. Like, look at traditional media, right? It isn't as trusted as a podcaster. You know what I mean? Because podcasters have larger audiences these days than traditional media does. And so it isn't so much about wading through all of the white noise. I think it's like there are those that have the louder voices that people are listening to. So just take a look at the last election cycle. Like so many people were talking, like wherever you stand on the deal, like going to all these podcasts made a difference. So like people are starting podcasts, like podcasts are like a thing these days because like we're not really listening to traditional media. I mean, there are some people that are, and who's listening to traditional media? I just put that question out there. We're not going to answer that, but like take a look to see who's listening to traditional media still, who still has cable TV, and like they're not really reaching that next generation. I don't think they're innovating. They're trying to. They're also doing podcasts and they're on social media and they're trying to do the thing. But, when you talk about traditional media these days, you know what I'm saying? It's not like the world's changed. Bottom line, the world is changed. You can get through the noisy world by being one of the loudest voices.
Isn't it crazy that young people, 18 to 25, their primary source of news is TikTok?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
But you have to follow those trends, and if you don't, you're not going to reach those young
Right.
people.
Yeah. It's changed really fast in the last 20 years. So you could still get your vision communicated. You just have to use the medium that I think people are at most.
And if 70% of Gen Zers are getting their media from TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and not only that, they can create personalized content feeds.
Mm-hmm.
They can scroll through whatever they don't want to see. Whoever learns how to break through that noise
Yeah.
is going to be the winner.
Hey, you listen to Gary Vaynerchuk right now, and he's talking about like the selling that's happening on social media, the selling that's happening on TikTok. And he's like, this is going to disrupt. And he's pretty good. He misses very few things, but like the stuff that he's about, he's like, hey, this stuff is the future because it's already happening. It's already happening in other countries. And like, if you're not on it, then, you're going to miss it. But yeah, like there are voices out there that are really telling us like where we're headed.
Your article blends timeless principles with the necessity to adapt and innovate.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to leaders who are struggling to balance holding on to the core values, which is important,
right,
while still staying flexible so that they can meet the future changes and challenges?
Take a look at the timeless things that we talked about. Yeah, hold on to that. But then keep in mind that you need to these days think globally about what it is that you're doing, because you're reaching the world. It's not just your neighborhood. It's not a localized kind of thing these days. You can be talking and reach out to a whole nother continent. Like this stuff that we're doing right now is global. It truly is. Now, whether people in another continent are listening or watching this is not the point. The point is that it can, it has the ability to go global. The other thing is more and more we need to appreciate cultural diversity, because it's happening. It's just changing. And I'm not talking about some DEI thing. I'm just talking about the world is changing. Like this week, I've eaten Mexican food, eaten Asian food, I've eaten all different kinds of food. Just talking about the kinds of food, like it's changing. Like your taste buds are changing. Your appetite for music is changing. Like K-pop wasn't a thing. Well, I guess it was a thing in Korea, but it wasn't a thing everywhere else. And now like these bands can fill like Madison Square Garden. They can, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of cultural diversity that's happening. I think you need to be technologically savvy. Man, I remember years ago, we had conversations of like, how do we do that? You just start and you just gotta stay on it. And like now we're having conversations about like the algorithm and the audience and what can we do? Like, I mean, you just need to be technologically savvy or hire someone that can help you to do that. And I know we've both worked with people that understand this better. But those are just some of the things that you need to keep in mind. The last thing is to build alliances and partnerships, right? You and I have this partnership of creating this thing. I didn't necessarily want to do this, but like, you kept bringing it up and I'm like,
absolutely.
Like, and it's worked both ways. Like you and I have had this, like, we should do this. And like, I don't know. But then we do it. And then we're like, okay, now it's pretty normal for us to do this. In fact, this is our second one this week. Like build alliances, build partnerships, work with folks. Like this I can do it all by myself is a thing of the past. And we need to make some of these adjustments in order to keep up with the leadership of the future.
Hey, you and I have been having these conversations for almost 30 years now. That's why we're doing them in this format, because we want to share that. Not that we have all the answers, but the exact opposite. We're working out ideas. We've been talking about these same issues for years now.
Yeah.
And if we can give a little bit of insight and perspective, we're here to do it.
I've had lots of former students and friends like reach out and say, hey man, that stuff that you're putting out on media, on leadership, on identity, man, they appreciate it. And so we don't have to reach everybody. That's not what we're trying to do. But like those that find us, first of all, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. But yeah, it's helping people. It truly is.
I love that we are growing and our audience is growing with us. That's always the fun thing. Here's what I got out of today, and I want to give you the last word, but if I understand it correctly, we really need to know that leadership isn't about knowing the latest trends.
No.
It's about grounding ourselves in principles while remaining adaptable to move into the future.
Yeah. And to not fear the future, right? Like there are some timeless things that we can focus in on, like we talked about today, that'll keep us grounded for sure.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you found it helpful, make sure you go over on to rtclc.com and sign up for our newsletter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share the podcast. It really helps us continue to bring this content to you. Dr. Len, thanks a lot, brother.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.